Hello, and you found Lisa talking again, and this is the second part of our regular Sunday history series looking at the development of the Silk Roads. So that's the civilizations and their political relationships and trading relationships between China and Europe. Now, today we're going to look at ancient Mesopotamia, better known in modernity as Iraq. Now, this is a civilization that we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to. Our writing system, our language, our rule of law, the modern Abrahamic faiths all have roots here. Now, geography tends to shape history very, very much, and what we're discussing here is the civilization that emerged at the end of the last ice age. So that's an event called the Pleistocene epoch. The Persian Gulf area's geography is entirely shaped by post-glacial flooding. Now, the commonly understood kind of roots of Mesopotamian civilization are that settlers come down from the Armenian Plateau. Now, the Armenian Plateau is incredibly important. It's part of a strip of land which is described as the steppe. It's also described as the Eastern Steppe, as the Western Steppe, as the Eurasian Steppe, and actually the bit that Armenia is on is often described as the Pontic Steppe. Now, if you get a world map, and I'm not talking about a world map where the UK is in the middle and it's twice the size of France, one where you've got the entire landmass between China and Europe, what you will find is there is a strip of land that starts about Hungary and ends about China, and is kind of marked as divided into the Western and the Eastern Steppe. Within the Eastern Steppe, you'll find countries like Mongolia and the civilizations that are at the root of Chinese history. And in the Western Steppe, you'll find countries like Armenia, and it will cover quite a significant swathe of the Balkans. Now, this strip of land is punctuated by mountain ranges. These mountain ranges are incredibly important, and the territory that we're talking about with ancient Mesopotamia is the territory between the Taurus Mountains and the Zagros. So this territory is tremendously important to understand in the modern world, to understand people like the Kurds. In antiquity, civilizations used these mountain ranges as the kind of points to mark out kind of almost an supranational kind of stabilization system, where high priestesses would have authority over the civilization that had emerged in the lowland to kind of act as almost like a proto-UN. In the modern world, we don't understand this, and we keep dividing them up with national boundaries, and peoples with nomadic roots like the Kurds and the Yazidis find themselves as political footballs and treated very, very badly. The Yazidi people in particular are actually the direct descendants of the people that we're going to discuss here in the early stages of Mesopotamian civilization, which correspond with the biblical Eden. Within Yazidi traditions, music, culture, and even in their manifestation of Islam, you find preservation of traditions that go back to the biblical Eden, because that's actually the stage in Mesopotamian civilization that we are talking about. Now, in the next video, I'm going to look at the kind of emergence of civilization, the city-states, the Akkadian Empire, the Neo-Sumerian Empire, and I'm going to look at how you can use the Abrahamic text to map out the development of the rule of law and these civilizations. But the stage in Mesopotamian civilization that I'm talking about here is described as Eden, E-D-I-N, but it's very much the biblical Eden that's represented as kind of day one in the Abrahamic faiths. Now, the term Mesopotamia was never used by this civilization. It's a Greek term that means the land between the two rivers, and it refers to the floodplains between the Tigris and the Euphrates, both of which are rivers that are named in the book of Genesis for this reason. Now, this river was very much shaped by post-glacial flooding. In the period that I'm discussing, it ran for an extra 600 kilometers, and for a significant part of its course, it ran as one river. And it's actually on this river that the first city in Mesopotamia evolved, a city called Eridu. The modern-day city of Basra actually emerges as a watch city to protect this earlier sacred city, and is very, very important in its own right on that score. Now, Eridu as a city was very, very interesting. It's not like later cities. It's the site of the first ziggurat, which is a man-made pyramid step structure, which would be a focus for sacred practice for a high priestess. It was overseen by a goddess, or perceived to be. And it would be a place where pastoralists, nomads, and traders from the Persian Gulf would come together, and they would work together and they would trade. This is a place where there was equality between men and women that we can see in the burial mat, in the burial sites. They show an equality between the sexes. Children are valued highly in this culture. There are grave goods which are specially crafted for children. Now, if you have a scoot about on the internet about ancient Mesopotamia and Google the word Anunnaki, you'll find that the mushrooming of civilization that happens here is so impressive, so sophisticated, and so unexpected that there are modern people who think that it can only be accounted for with alien intervention. Eridu is the city where it's perceived that kingship descended from heaven, and the dynastic lines that are evident in both the books of Genesis and that are still being discussed by the peers of Muhammad in the Ibn Ishaq biography of Muhammad actually begin right here. The appearance of a god called Enki into the pantheon indicates a patriarchal shift and the beginning of these dynastic threads. Now, this civilization's development here is incredibly rapid. And the sophisticated technology that they use has actual roots. While I like occasional Ancient Aliens episode, I don't really believe in aliens and I don't believe in God. And when I look at the civilization at the Yellow River and Mount Song, you actually find an explanation for where this civilization has come from. Because in actual fact, the early civilization in Mesopotamia, the first stage in it, is a direct mirror to the civilization that emerged on the Yellow River around Mount Song. The ziggurats are emulations of the step pyramid structures that emerge here. Mount Song is defined by stepped pyramids that emerge over a long period of time with platforms that are about trading. There is an absence, even though they have sophisticated bronze items, there is an absence of weaponry. This is the place where kingship is said to have descended from heaven and begun the Chinese dynastic threads that the Yellow Emperor, the first emperor of the Xia dynasty, is harking back to for his own legitimacy. Nuar, the goddess, is said to have her roots here and is said to have made the first people from clay. You find this motif repeated in the Quran and the Bible later on. The Book of Changes with the I Ching is the first example we have of the symbolic writing that later actually defines Mesopotamian literature and becomes the parable writing for the Bible and the Quran. If you look at Mount Geghard on the Armenian Plateau, which is an incredibly important site, said to be where Noah's Ark docked, it's where Christ's lance is left when Christ is said to descend after the events of the New Testament. There are geological features, the symphonic stones, which are almost identical to those at Mount Song. This is a direct mirror of this civilization in China. When you look at the oracle bone script, you find symbols that reappear in the Hebrew alphabet and the Phoenician alphabet with roots here. Now, the Armenian Plateau, which is very sophisticated, you find evidence of double blast furnaces. They're capable of using two types of metal at once in 6000 BC. This is the trigger for what later becomes, within a couple of thousand years, becomes the early Bronze Age in the rest of Europe. This is technology that's directly coming from China. There's evidence of weaving of plant materials that's incredibly sophisticated and shows civilization has been here for a while. The Armenian Plateau is linked to the Eastern Steppe. It's inherently linked to China and the roots of Chinese civilization. This is not surprising. To get onto the steppe, you have to go to the Zungarian Gate, which currently acts as a railway corridor between China and the West. And you come out at the Cilician Gate in Turkey, and you can get directly from Armenia down through the mountains, through the Cilician Gate, down to the Levant and get to Africa that way. This is not surprising. But what's really surprising about ancient Mesopotamian civilization is that actually there appears to have been a complete identity break and a political break. And not only is this civilization a mirror of Mount Song, it's a breaking away from that civilization and a complete break away from it. There are no aesthetic features in the styling which refer back to Mount Song or to Chinese culture. The trading relationships which shape the Mesopotamian civilization come from the Indus Valley. Dilmun, Magan, which is a kind of modern day Amman. Dilmun is modern day Bahrain. These are on that route and on that trade route. The seals that we use to examine the high priestesses and the kings and the dynastic structures in Mesopotamia are directly from the Indus Valley. While they're using Chinese bronze technology and copying Chinese techniques in their pottery, they're actually using decorative techniques that are imported from the Indus Valley. This is a complete political break away. This appears to be the point. Chinese civilization continues to develop in isolation away from this. And in actual fact, this appears to be where the political break between the Western and the Eastern steppe is formed. The acceleration in civilization which people attribute to alien intervention, while it might be spurred on by the difficulty in irrigating the land here and water management imported and techniques which will have come from China, define Mesopotamian civilization. They have to use a canal system and develop that to have this civilization. What appears here is the reflection of the civilization at Mount Song and an actual rejection of it and a move away and a restart point, so that in the books of Genesis this is considered day one. Now, in terms of understanding the development of the western half of the steppe, there is actually no more useful text than the Bible itself. The books of Genesis and Exodus will actually give you a way to map out the development of this civilization that linguists can't manage. You know, we're currently confused over, there's an absence of evidence of the steppes, and these texts will actually do this for you when you put them in the archaeological and linguistic context. But they will tell you nothing about the Eastern steppe. But what the first stage in, when you actually map out civilization this way, it gives you like a tree of civilization with the starting point here in Eridu in Mesopotamia. But what's important to understand is that the roots of this tree come from China and the Indus Valley civilization, and that actually these connections and roots to our civilization are much older than we have ever considered before. We have a tendency in the West to think that the Silk Roads means, you know, a man walked from Han China to Rome to sell silk, and this was the opening of these relationships. But this is actually much more complex and about the interplay of civilizations going back a long way. And this is the first time in our history we've had the technology, information, and knowledge to be able to put together these pictures. Now, in the next video, I'm going to look at the further development of Mesopotamian civilization. I'm going to look at the development of the rule of law through the different stages as this civilization moves west. And I'm going to show you how you can use the Abrahamic texts to help you guide that study. But what I'm also going to look at is the formation of the modern identity of Iraq and the role that we have played in their civilization. Because actually one of the reasons I think, and in my opinion, that we use the term the Silk Roads is because we're a bit shy of looking, but we've lost the ability now to live in a world where we don't hear the actions of our foreign policy described. So that's the end of this video about the kind of biblical Eden, the first stages of Mesopotamian civilization. And I'll see you in the next one, which I'm about to start now. This one has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.